Hello and welcome to Pathways Through the Prairie, where we interview North Dakota librarians and staff, state agency leaders and employees, and interesting North Dakotans. I'm State Librarian Mary Soucie, and today I'm joined by the Department of Water Resources Director, Reice Haase. Reice was appointed to the director position by Governor Armstrong in January of 2025. Thank you for joining me today, Reice.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to learning more about your agency. So, Reice, tell us, what is the core mission and priorities of the North Dakota Department of Water Resources?
So our core mission is to manage North Dakota's water, not only our water needs and also the risks for the people's benefit. But in order to properly explain it, I really think it's important just to take a step back and see the history of water resources and water resource management in North Dakota. And it has been a mission that was recognized even at statehood, even prior to statehood when we were a territory. Water was always very important for Dakota Territory at that time. So when we became a state, the framers of our state constitution recognized the importance of water. And actually, during the constitutional discussions, there was significant debate about water and how North Dakota as a state was going to approach water. And they ultimately enshrined it in our constitution, and it still to this day remains virtually unchanged, that water shall forever remain the property of the state, for the purposes of public benefit. So what that means today, we follow what we call the prior appropriation doctrine. So first in time, first in right. The state of North Dakota is tasked through its Department of Water Resources to manage that water. We in turn appropriate that water to North Dakota citizens who want to put that water to a beneficial use, put it that first in time, first in right, meaning if you're the first one in line to put that water to beneficial use, you get priority date. So you can apply for a appropriation to put that water, whether it's irrigation, whether it's for a municipal water supply, whether it's for an industrial use. The first person to apply for that water gets the priority date. And then we're also tasked with ensuring that that water is being put to beneficial use. So there's not like a large volume that's being held up in a permit that's not being used. We would then review and perfect those permits and make sure that our water is being put to use in a fair manner as well, that everyone in North Dakota has, fair access to be able to use our water resources.
I'm in Bismarck, and so I'm familiar with a pretty big water resource in Bismarck, the river, which we like to take advantage of in our pontoon boat. Are there a lot of other water sources throughout the state?
Yes. So if you look at the state as a whole, over 60 million acre feet in our aquifers. And an acre foot, if you're not familiar, 1 acre foot is the amount of water it would take to fill up 1 acre of land with 1 foot of water. And, just given the vast volumes of water, that's how we tend to measure it. So 1 acre foot is the equivalent of 325,000 gallons. So if you do the math, we estimate roughly 20 trillion gallons of water just in our aquifers, our groundwater. But we also have, all our surface water, over 7,000 river miles. And of course, you mentioned the Missouri River, which is our largest source of water in North Dakota. And of course, Lake Sakakawea as well. So massive amounts of water. And I'd say just generally speaking, our surface water tends to be, kind of better water quality and better water source for North Dakotans than our groundwater, which just naturally occurring groundwater, tends to have some naturally occurring salinity and things like that. So we do prefer our surface water sources if at all possible, but still have an incredible resource with our groundwater as well.
That's a lot of water. Wow, I had no idea we had so much water in the state. So, Reice, the state library's vision is providing pathways to knowledge and opportunities. What was your pathway into public service?
So I'm a lifelong North Dakotan. I was born and raised in Williston prior to the Bakken oil boom. I left the state for college, went to the University of Iowa, was very interested in politics, knew that they were, the first in the nation for the primaries. So I wanted to be part of that process. And went to Iowa for 4 years, decided at that time I really missed North Dakota. I really missed home, and I wanted to move back home. And around the time I was in college is when the Bakken oil boom kicked off. So incredible opportunities as well. You know, it was interesting growing up in North Dakota before the boom. Everyone just kind of assumed, you know, if you wanted a good job, you had to leave the state and go elsewhere. And that was kind of what I was assuming I was going to have to do. But after the oil boom kicked off, I realized there wasn't necessarily a whole lot of economic opportunity at that time elsewhere in the country. But North Dakota definitely was booming. And I was kind of, you know, like I was obviously very proud of my home state in that fact, but definitely wanted to get back. So I moved back home and started getting involved with natural resources. So after college, I started in my private sector career, primarily for the oil and gas industry. So I did consulting work, a lot of environmental consulting, permitting, government affairs type consulting. And then when Governor Burgum was elected, I had the opportunity to go work in his administration. He hired me on as a policy advisor where I advised him on natural resources, energy, agriculture. And that's how I got my start in public service.
Okay, wow. So my son graduated from Iowa with his undergrad. Go Hawkeyes.
Yes, absolutely.
I got to get that in.
Yes.
And how was it different in Iowa versus North Dakota? What were some of the differences?
I think for me, the biggest difference, just culturally coming from Western North Dakota and going to Iowa, you know, I love the great outdoors. I love hunting, fishing, camping. It seemed like at least in Eastern Iowa, there wasn't a whole lot of that kind of culture.
Sure.
And also, not that Iowa City is a huge city, but coming from pre-boom small town Williston, it definitely was, if to me, felt like a bigger city. So there was a bit of a culture shock from that perspective as well.
Sure. And of course, the Bakken oil boom is the third oil boom in the state,
Yes.
but maybe the most impactful one, the one of the longer ones as well. What are some of the changes you've noticed pre-boom versus post-boom?
So I'd say obviously a huge financial opportunity for our state, huge financial opportunity for many North Dakotans. You know, I would see families that I grew up with that would financially struggle until the oil boom. And it's just amazing how quickly things turned around for so many families and so many people. And, you know, I think, you know, from a cultural perspective, there was certainly a learning curve for especially some of the Williston natives that had to go through a lot of the growth very rapidly, and a lot of outsiders coming in. I think there was a cultural adjustment that certainly happened, you know, going from kind of more of that small town tight knit community to welcoming of a lot of the outsiders coming in to work in North Dakota as well. But even from, you know, a water perspective, all of our work is funded by our oil and gas industry. So you know, certainly, you know, coming over here to work for the Department of Water Resources, you know, they say oil and water don't mix, but certainly in North Dakota they do. They are tied at the hip. Our work in water resources and the work of the oil and gas industry, you know, oil and gas funds all the work that water does, and the work that we do helps ensure that we can continue to have responsible oil and gas development in the future.
That's really interesting. I would have had no idea that they're so tightly woven like that. Very interesting. So how does your agency's work directly impact the lives of North Dakotans? I mean, you've talked about that a little bit. And is there a recent significant achievement or an initiative that's had a tangible positive effect?
Absolutely. So our agency is made up of 98 staff. We cover a lot of ground. Obviously, you can imagine water is a huge topic in any state, especially in North Dakota. So I touched on a little bit of the water appropriation side of things, how we allocate our water resources. We also have, through our Office of State Engineer, a regulatory division that's responsible for issuing permits for, dams and dikes and other flood control type devices. So managing that risk on behalf of the citizens of North Dakota to ensure that, those devices are built safely. Managing and working with FEMA on the National Floodplain Insurance Program is another huge role that division plays. Some of the other areas in our water development division, we manage state-owned water utility projects. So two of our largest right now are the Southwest Pipeline Project, which, as its name implies, covers the entire southwest part of the state. That was started in the 1970s and today is largely built out, but there's always more work to do, of course, to continue to expand that service. So getting clean water for that entire swath of the state, from Beach to Dickinson to Hebron down to Flasher, that whole section of the state is served by our Southwest system. And then Northwest Area Water Supply, or NAWS, that serves from Minot north to Botno and Mohall, that whole area of the state. That project was started in 2002. Unfortunately, that was kind of held up in litigation because we were taking Missouri River water and crossing the Continental Divide. So in North Dakota, we have two major drainage basins, depending on what part of the state you're in. Either the water drains into the Missouri River, which eventually goes south through Louisiana into the Gulf, or it goes north into the Hudson Bay through Canada. And the Continental Divide is roughly north of Max, North Dakota, between the Missouri River and Minot. So because we would be transferring water from the Missouri River over the Continental Divide into a new drainage basin, that caused some concern with Canada. And they were concerned that there may be certain species or something in the Missouri River water that wouldn't necessarily exist in their water. And they were worried that we would transfer by moving water north to Minot. So that was held up by years of litigation. We have committed to a number of steps to mitigate any of that risk. We've made it through that process and are now hoping, we've made a lot of progress on construction, but we're hoping that we'll finally get water moved north through that system by the end of this calendar year. And I would invite you, if you've never been, we would love to host you and give you a tour of the Biota Water Treatment Plant in Max. I mean, it is amazing. I see it almost as overkill in some ways, how much they treat that water. It goes through the Biota Water Treatment Plant in Max. You'd think there would be no possibility of anything being able to get out of that water treatment plant. And then it moves into Minot and it's treated a second time in the Minot Water Treatment Plant. So that water will be, I'd argue, the cleanest water in the nation by that point.
Well, wow. That's and Max is a small community to have such a huge water treatment plant in it. So for those who might not know, Reice, can you just tell us briefly what the Continental Divide is and what it does?
Yes. So the Continental Divide is, topographic. So on one side of the Continental Divide, all the rivers, streams would drain into a certain basin. And in this case, in North Dakota, it would be draining into the Gulf of Mexico. On the other side of the Continental Divide, just the way the land slopes, all of the water would drain into a different basin, ultimately into the Hudson Bay.
Okay, and that's in Canada.
Correct.
Okay, there's so much, as we've been interviewing different agency leaders, it's just been fascinating to learn so much about our state. I moved here in 2014 from Illinois, and Midwest is Midwest in some ways, but there's just some really big differences. And we host Larks players. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bismarck Larks, but they're college age players that come from all across the country. And one of them was just asking me about Minnesota, because they play a lot in Minnesota, and was asking about the land of 1,000 lakes. And I kind of chuckled and said, well, some North Dakotans would say the land of 1,000 puddles. But how do we compare I mean, Minnesota's known for being water, right? Like land of a thousand lakes. That's their state motto or whatever. How does our water mass compare with Minnesota's? Or can you even do that? Can you compare state to state?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, in North Dakota, Western North Dakota tends to be drier. Eastern North Dakota tends to be wetter. And our environment in North Dakota, when it comes to water, is very unique. You know, we have the Prairie Pothole region, which runs, generally speaking, diagonal across the state from northwest to southeast. You know, thousands and thousands of wetlands and prairie potholes, obviously a huge um, opportunity for wildlife production, world-class hunting because of that.
What's a prairie
Very
pothole, Reese?
So a prairie pothole is essentially a wetland on the
Okay.
prairie. Um, you know, breeding ground for ducks and whooping cranes and a lot of wildlife use as well. Great opportunities for outdoor recreation here in North Dakota, and prairie potholes are, you know, really unique to our state.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that's probably the top difference we would have with Minnesota.
Okay.
And if you talk to anyone from Devil's Lake, they will be the first to tell you that our Devil's Lake fishery is much superior to the fisheries in Minnesota.
Well, let's hope we don't have a lot of listeners from Minnesota who are going to refute that, but that's funny. Um, of course, in the recent news, uh, we're just coming off of the tragic flash flooding that happened in Texas, and there's all kinds of theories about, you know, why that happened and what could there have been better notice or, you know, whatever. And one of the things I've been wondering about is because, and now that you're talking about so much water in North Dakota, is something like that a risk here for North Dakota?
You know, I'd say we have done a fantastic job as a state and as an agency in being proactive to mitigate any of those risks here. I briefly mentioned earlier the NFIP program. So through our regulatory division, our staff have for years been very proactive. I'd say arguably one of the more proactive states in the entire country as it relates to managing that flood risk. We were the first state to develop our own, you know, kind of floodplain mapping through our risk map program. And it's available online on our website, dwr.nd.gov. You can go there today and you can find our risk map. You can type in your address and see what your risk would be anywhere in North Dakota. And we were the first state to do that and have that available for the general public for free. Our agency, one of the biggest roles we also play, we strive to have scientifically driven decision making, which requires us to collect a lot of data. In fact, last year alone, we collected more data than the previous 80 years combined. And
Holy
arguably,
smokes.
exactly, yeah, arguably, I'd say we are the agency that collects and hosts by far the most data. And why do we need that much data at Water Resources? A big part of it is just this very topic. LIDAR, so it's like they use lasers to measure you know, topography on the ground, and you can use that LIDAR data then to model flood risk and things like that. I believe we're also the first state to ever have full coverage of our entire state with LIDAR. And we continue to update that, of course, on a regular basis. And not only for our agency, but other agencies use it as well. I know like the state geologist, for example, uses it to map landslide risks. Other agencies use it for their modeling. We use it for our floodplain type mapping. And in addition to all this data that we collect, and that we are very proactive to make sure we are making scientifically based decisions, we are also very proactive in community outreach. So the amount of communities in North Dakota that participate with our you know, National Floodplain Insurance Program, it's 339 communities in North Dakota, and we run this program based on local, you know, engagement, local lead. You know, no one knows the land better than the locals, local floodplain managers, local emergency managers, county commissions, communities. So we really engage with them, provide them the resources, and let them really drive a lot of this with our support. And with 339 communities in North Dakota that participate, that is by far the most out of any state, really. You compare that to like Colorado or some of our other neighbors, and they generally range between 50 to 60, maybe 80 communities. And look at North Dakota with our low population, 339 communities. So I think that's
Wowza.
really telling how proactive we have been as a state and how proactive our local communities are and taking advantage of this data as well. So I'd say, we've done a fantastic job of being proactive to help mitigate those risks here in North Dakota.
Wow, that's really awesome. And now we know where to go when we need some data. Tell us, what are some opportunities, some exciting opportunities, in for your department?
For opportunities, I'll start off with kind of our funding. Everyone seems to be really focused on the funding programs that we have as well. So like I mentioned previously, all of our funding comes 100% by our oil and gas industry. So our oil extraction tax formula, 20.5% of our extraction tax collected as a state goes into what we call the Resources Trust Fund. And that is a constitutional fund that collects these taxes, earns interest, and then we in turn invest that as a state into water projects, whether it's water supply, flood control, flood mitigation, conveyance. That is a huge part of the work that we do as well. Over the next 14 years, like, we spend a lot of time working with local communities, planning what are your water needs, what are your water supply needs, what's your flood control needs. And our current water development plan over the next 14 years shows 3.4 billion in water needs as a state. And that is, water supply projects, like I mentioned, rural flood control, general water, dams, dikes, safety, things like that. We just this legislative session, we proposed kind of a new approach on how we fund that. So in the past, the way it had worked, the legislature waited for the tax revenue to come in from the previous biennium, and then they would wait for it to be sitting in that bank account. And then the next biennium, they would then allocate based off of that. What we proposed is, well, that model may have kind of worked in the past, but what that really means is now you have all this cash sitting there for 2, 3, 4 years, waiting for the legislature to, come back in the next biennium. In the meantime, we have all these water needs, we have inflation, costs are increasing, and water projects take a lot longer than 2 years to build, and they're very complex. So is there a better way for us to manage that cash going forward? So what we worked with the Bank of North Dakota, we developed a cash management model, and we showed the legislature that, we're sitting on all this cash while we're waiting for you to appropriate it. Can we actually use that cash while we're sitting on it to accelerate some of these larger water projects, have some inflationary savings, get that money working for North Dakotans a lot quicker? So they agreed. And with our new cash management approach, the way we describe it, it's like if you have a checking account and your bank typically gives you an overdraft privilege. That's essentially what the legislature gave us, was a line of credit that we see as our overdraft privilege. Honestly, we'll likely never tap into it, but it gives us additional appropriation authority to approve projects. Of course, they take 2, 4, 6, 8 years to complete. And once they're completed, they come to us and get reimbursed for those costs. So while we're waiting for them to be completed, we can put that cash to use in other projects. We can earn additional income at the Bank of North Dakota and just have a better overall cash management strategy. That's really where I see one of our largest upcoming opportunities is in North Dakota.
That's very forward thinking. And you started in January and session starts in January. So was this already in the works when you started and you were able to carry it forward? Like your team kind of put this idea together, or did you hit the ground running in January and thought, I'm going to shake up my whole agency and come up with this new funding model?
No, great question. In North Dakota, obviously, when you have a new governor come in and a new administration, and new governors tend to, kind of bring new people into their cabinets. And Governor Armstrong was inaugurated December 15th. Legislative session started January 9th, I believe, which is also happened to be
Mhm.
my first day on the job. Um, that's not a lot of time to put together a new budget. So we were working on this throughout the early part of legislative session. So we would remind the legislature, hey, with the new governor, new director, new leadership, we need some time to put together this new budget. So we worked with the legislature and with the bank on this kind of new approach starting in early January and working throughout the entire legislative session to, I guess, sell the legislature on the idea, work through all the questions they had and everything. So it was a new approach that really started in the Armstrong administration.
Yeah, wow. And it sounds like it's really pivotal work that's going to impact the state for positively for a really long time. So kudos to you and your team and to Governor Armstrong's team for like diving right in and addressing this heads on. That's got to be really rewarding, but probably a little overwhelming. I mean, session can be overwhelming to begin with and to be brand new in the position. And you hadn't worked with the department before, right?
So thankfully, I had worked with the department
Okay.
in the Burgum administration as policy advisor.
Oh,
I
sure.
got to work with and know the leadership team. So thankfully, it wasn't like a completely um, new topic, new
Hmm.
relationships. I had some of those relationships already. And I can't say enough about the team here at DWR. We have an amazing staff, dedicated staff. They're all very passionate about what they do. And I'd say one of the biggest takeaways, like especially for me, is like, you see some of the work that they do external to the agency, but once you get into the agency and you realize, wow, there's so much more that goes into it, so much work that goes on behind the scenes. It's something we all take for granted. You go home, you turn on the tap, you assume there's going to be water, you assume you're not going to get flooded out anytime there's a rainstorm, but there's a lot of work behind the scenes that had to go in to
Hmm.
make that happen, and a lot of work to keep it going. And these absolutely dedicated public servants that work for DWR are a huge part of what makes that happen.
That's really, really great. One of the things, of course, being in the library field that we focus on is access to credible information. And it's so crucial in today's environment for folks to have access to that. And you're collecting all of this data. How do you make sure that that information and your resources are accessible and that the public can understand the data that you're collecting and putting out in the world?
Great question. And the way we have approached that, once again, another great opportunity of how proactive the department has been. So, the old way of collecting some of this data was sending field personnel out into the field. They have a clipboard, they'd collect the data, they'd take physical measurements. Obviously, as you can imagine, it'd take a long time to do that. And then you have the opportunity for human error with that as well. Very expensive. Um, so the department solved that by developing what we call our presence system. And presence is our acronym. It stands for pushing remote sensors. So it's something the department built in-house and deployed these sensors across the state. So instead of sending someone physically out into the field to collect data manually, we have this presence system now that can do it automatically and in real time. And the more, of course, presence systems that we've deployed, the more data we receive. And of course, that's a big part of the reason why we have so much data today. But anything from groundwater levels to stream levels, stream flows, things like that, which really help inform our management of water resources. But when you talk about credibility of that data, um, when we deploy our presence systems, we deploy two sensors simultaneously. So we have kind of a backup sensor to cross-check. And if there were, differing readings on that, we would know, okay, something's going on with this system. We need to go out there and recalibrate. And obviously, if the two sensors really strongly correlate with each other, that gives us a high degree of confidence that that data is accurate.
Do individuals interact directly with your agency, or are you primarily working with cities and counties and, communities?
Yes, absolutely. Volunteers, North Dakota citizens, landowners um, are always working with us, and we really this wouldn't be possible without North Dakota landowners, North Dakota citizens being willing to work with us on this. Like the present systems, for example, many of them are on private land where the landowner has raised their hand and said, hey, we'd volunteer to have one. And in their case, they love having it too, because then the landowner can log onto our website and see in real time, oh, I know exactly what my groundwater is doing. I know exactly what the stream flows look like on my property. So it's really a mutual benefit for everyone.
That's awesome. Artificial intelligence is taking over, right? It's the talk of the world right now, and what impacts it's going to have, and how do we ensure that it's accurate, and all of that. Is there any impact in your industry of artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. And I'd say in two ways. The first way, of course, we are always looking for opportunities to increase our efficiency as an agency and our work that we do. We are exploring opportunities, of course, for using AI if it would be a benefit to us. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of ground truthing and things like that that have to happen in that. But that's one way. The other way is just our state as a whole. With the growth in AI comes a growth in demand for computing power. And it is an incredible amount of power, energy, and water that is needed to run the data centers that actually run AI. And with that incredible growth and incredible demand, we also see a huge opportunity for the state of North Dakota as well. And, we already see the data center growth in Ellendale, massive data center, but massive opportunity for that community as well. Jobs, economic development, more income for the state, more income for the citizens of North Dakota. I would say that the data growth is our next Bakken oil boom. That's what's coming in the future. If we play our cards right, we could really capitalize on that and see a huge opportunity for our state. Having learned growing up in Williston and living in Williston through the Bakken oil boom, I think there are certainly lessons learned that we had in Western North Dakota that we can teach the rest of the state about, and be able to accomplish this growth in the right way. But it all needs water, and it all needs energy. 10 times the amount of electricity we produce today as a state, that's the demand that we've seen as a state for projects that are interested in coming directly to North Dakota to build these data centers. So obviously we can't accommodate that overnight. It's going to take a lot of planning and a lot of collaboration, but incredible opportunities as well.
In all these ways that water impacts us, that like we have no idea. Like you said, I turn on my tap and expect water to come out, or I hop in the shower and I expect to have very hot water. And but there's all these behind the scenes ways that water is impacting us that we would never have thought of. So that's been really interesting to learn about. So Reice, you're pretty new in your tenure, but what have you found so far to be the most rewarding aspect of serving as the director of the Department of Water Resources?
First off, it's been very rewarding to work with this team. Like I mentioned, this team is fantastic to work with. They inspire me every day, just seeing their attitude toward public service. And, as a public servant, you don't always get to see the impact. You go to work every day, you work hard, knowing that you're working for your citizens, your fellow citizens of North Dakota, your family, your friends. Not always getting to see that impact at times, obviously, as a public servant can be discouraging. So it's important just to take a step back and remember and reflect on where that impact is. But there is one recent story I think was a huge, demonstration of how it can all work together really well for the benefit of everyone. And it was kind of a minor example, but really a neat one. So one of the roles we also play at the department, when we talk about our presence systems and we talk about our data management, we also have our own drilling rig to drill observation wells across the state, and that helps us monitor our aquifers. Well, the legislature approved funding for us to get a new drilling rig. And when we get a new drilling rig, we need to train our staff on using it. We need to test it out and make sure everything's working. So this spring, we were working through that, trying to plan out, okay, with the new drilling rig, where are we going to drill? How are we going to test this out? Get our staff some time with it. Just so happened that around the same time, the city of Mandan, they just built a new boat ramp and Game and Fish had donated a fish cleaning station. So they reached out to us and they said, look, we have this new fish cleaning station. It's great, but we have no water supply for it. Do you guys have funding, or can you guys point us in the right direction to get water funding for it? So we had a creative thought. Well, since we're already going to be testing our drilling rig and we're going to need to test it anyway, why not just test it out there, drill our test hole, turn it over to the city of Mandan, and they can convert it into a water supply well for the new fish cleaning station, and it's a win-win for everyone. So that's what we did, and it was successful, and they were able to convert that into a water supply well, and now they have water supply for that fish cleaning station that every North Dakotan now has access to use. It was just an amazing example of us working together with our local communities, working together as one, and having a real benefit for everyone.
Oh, that's really cool. As someone who will never take advantage of that fish cleaning station, I can still appreciate the work that you've done and be grateful that those who want to have access to it can utilize it. That's super cool. Is there any final message that you'd like to share with our listeners, either about your agency or just about state government in general?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about public service and all the work that goes behind the scenes. Obviously, first off, not wanting to take that for granted. We do have a lot of resources as a state available. I'd say certainly we always want to be transparent with the work that we do. And we do efforts like, these podcasts, for example, build out of our websites. Our agency does a lot of outreach for the public, whether it's, educational opportunities or, one recent example, we worked with the Parks Department to start doing ranger talks. So if you ever stay at a state park, you'll notice that they have, an amphitheater, and usually they'll do like nightly programs, educational opportunities while you're camping, and it's, free and available for the public to use. We worked with them to develop a water-related ranger talk. So at Fort Stevenson State Park, I believe it's this upcoming weekend, the 18th, and then as well as the weekend of the 25th and 26th, we're going to have ranger talks about the Missouri River and the importance of the Missouri River to the state of North Dakota. So that's a huge opportunity. In our outreach programs, we work with local schools. Just this year alone, we've estimated that over 8,500 pre-K through 12th grade students have had access to our water outreach and education efforts.
Wow, that's really fun. I always like to end the podcast by asking people for a book recommendation. I won't ask what your favorite book is, although you're welcome to share if you have a favorite. But what's a book that you've read anytime, at any point in your life, that you have really enjoyed and you love to tell other people about?
When I was in high school, I read The Grapes of Wrath, and that was just one book in particular that comes to mind that I really just enjoyed reading. I really enjoyed and then it was funny because then going through the Bakken oil boom and everything, I saw a lot of similarities, I guess, but a lot of differences as well. Like, man, this has been an incredible opportunity for our state. I'm so glad we didn't have to go through that 1930s style depression and drought and things like that. And, speaking of drought as well, obviously on the water topic, we have done an incredible amount of work as well to prepare ourselves so we're never in that situation again. So, reading that Grapes of Wrath and thinking about what they went through in the 1930s, and I can't imagine having to go through that. So incredibly thankful that today we're not in that position.
Sure. And it's a classic, Grapes of Wrath. Reice, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I know just so much more about your agency, but I have a feeling we've just barely scratched the surface of what we could learn, and the data that you collect, and all of the different ways that you're impacting every North Dakotan every day. So it was just really an incredible opportunity for us to learn more about your agency. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.